With multiple recent natural disasters impacting people, it's important to start preparing for this upcoming winter. While it may seem a ways off, it's going to be here sooner than you can imagine. In this video, we're going to look at 7 critical categories of items that you should have ready on standby. And if the power were to go down in your area in the middle of the winter, how ready would you be? And not only are the items that we're going to cover useful in a winter storm, but they'll also get you through a host of disasters where you're forced to remain inside for an extended period of time. Download the Extreme Weather Survival Guide today. I'll post a link in the description and comments section below, or visit cityprepping.com/weather for a free guide to help you set up your preps to survive even the worst weather events. If you're new to this channel, my name is Chris, and on this channel we discuss emergency preparedness, aka prepping. At the time of recording this video, several massive hurricanes have impacted Florida and the surrounding areas, resulting in a large influx of viewers and subscribers to this channel. Now, this video will hopefully help you, whether you're just starting out building the foundations of preparedness or you've been doing this for a while. In this video, I've divided the essential items that you should get into 7 categories. We're going to cover safety, warmth, shelter, and insulation, heating, lighting, food and cooking, and communication. And again, the items that we're about to lay out can be used in the winter or pretty much after any disaster scenario. Now, one last thing, please don't be overwhelmed by what I'm about to cover in this video. I've spent a lot of years picking up gear, and hopefully this video is going to give you some ideas, or at least help you fill the gaps that you may not have considered for items that you'll want to have if there's a disaster. I'm going to put links to all the items that we're going to cover in the description and comment section below. So let's go ahead and jump in. Safety. When it comes to safety, preparation is key. In a cold weather emergency, the risk of fire, carbon monoxide poisoning, and injury, it increases. Even if you're taking precautions for you and your home, those around you, if you were, for example, live in a townhouse or an apartment, they may not. So it's critical to have the right equipment to protect yourself. Now, these items that we're about to cover are your first line of defense. And it's also vital to have basic medical supplies to handle any emergencies if you can't reach 911 or the services are down. Now, here are some of the essential safety items to include in your preps. The first one is a carbon monoxide and fire detector. These prevent deadly carbon monoxide poisoning, or at least they'll alert you if there's a level that's not safe. In carbon monoxide, it's an invisible odorless gas, and it's gonna make you fall asleep, but you won't wake up. And you wanna be alerted, obviously, if it's in your environment. Even if you practice good safety, again, if you live in an apartment, your neighbors may not. Their carelessness, it could cause you harm. So you want to make sure that you have the basic safety of carbon monoxide detectors and a fire alarm. Now, the next item here is a fire extinguisher. And also we've got a fire blanket. And as you can see, we have baking soda. And these are essential for fire safety. The most efficient is a good fire extinguisher. A fire blanket is good for small fires, and you can use some baking soda on some small fires as well, but it's going to take a lot and it's hard to spread. But still, I'd like to have something like a big bag or a box if I'm cooking, especially in these types of situation and there's a fire that erupts. Now, the next item is a first aid kit. You can pick up these online. You can build your own. I've had this one for years and it's worked pretty well. And if you're snowed in, first responders, they're not going to be coming to rescue you, and your medical care is really in your hands. You also want to make sure that in your first aid kit, you have a tourniquet. Now, I've got several different tourniquets here that I've tried over the years, or rather I've collected over the years. I've got some various tourniquets in here and some quick clot items, but whenever there's a situation and you have a laceration, a regular first aid kit is not going to have a tourniquet, but a tourniquet can mean the difference between life and death, especially in those seconds after you or someone in your family has a laceration. So you want to make sure that you add one on. I'll put a link to a reliable company, North American Rescue. They're about $32. I'm not affiliated with them, but they're ones that are reputable that companies, first responders often use. Warmth. Staying warm is obviously important when the power goes out. So let's go through a few items that could be very useful. I'm going to start pulling things off here so I can clear up some space. Now, these right here are hand warmers. They're electric hand warmers. Of course, we're all familiar with the disposable kind that you break open and then slide in your gloves, but there's options like this that are electrical. Now, Mylar bags, or rather, I'm sorry, not Mylar bags, but a foil Mylar rescue blanket is what these are referred to. Extremely cheap, and you can stuff these inside of a jacket or use them to wrap yourself, especially if you're in a sleeping bag. Just an option, to reflect heat back. This is a wool blanket, and again, these are very popular to just stay warm well, for obvious reasons. The next one I'll show is a sleeping bag that's rated for cold weather conditions. Now, whatever the rating is on the side, say it's 20 degrees Fahrenheit, that's what it's going to provide to keep you alive. It may not necessarily keep you warm at 20 degrees. So obviously the lower the rating on the temperature, the warmer it's going to keep you at lower temperatures. The next that we'll talk about are some things like bottles. This is a metal clean canteen. If you were to add hot water in this, the surface, depending on how well these are insulated, I haven't used this one in a while, but some are more insulated than others. If they do get very hot, you don't obviously want to put this up against your skin. Putting a sock or wrapping it with a towel, putting it inside your coat or your sleeping bag will obviously provide you warmth, and you can keep that close to your body. Something maybe like an Algene could work as well. Again, this is not going to be insulated, so obviously you're going to have to wrap this. So you're not going to want to put that directly on your skin if you do put hot water in there. The next are some, okay, so let's talk about clothing really quick. The key is to layer and to keep extremities warm. What do I mean? Well, our hands, we want to keep those warm. We don't want to let our hands start getting cold, because now that begins to, again, the whole point of this is just to stay warm. The more we expose our body to cold temperatures, the more our body has to warm up, has to burn calories and energy to try to maintain body heat. As you can see, I have nothing on the top of my head, so something like just a basic cap to keep my head warm. I have fleece for both of these, options for gloves and my head. Now, when it comes to even your feet, you know, how many times have you been somewhere cold, and even in your house in the winter, and your feet get cold? So if I was in a place the electricity went out, yeah, you better believe I'm going to put on some thick boots and a pair of socks to keep my feet warm. Now, as far as clothing go, the objective is to layer. You're not going to just want to throw on one big jacket and just hope that's going to do the job. I just layer up. So for example, I've got a pair of thermal long johns and kind of, you know, just long sleeve shirt. It's, I forget, it's a polymer based material that will wick away some moisture. But the goal is to put that first layer on, and it's just kind of basically long johns. The next is a shirt and some pants. I would put that on over. So now I've created a second layer. Then I can go up to, the next layer, something like a goose down jacket or just any type of jacket that's designed to provide insulation and warmth. And then finally, I would have, even indoors, use something like this, just a light jacket. This is just kind of a wind jacket that will fit over the fleece jacket. But the point is, as you can see, I'm building layers upon layers. So if I get too hot, I can peel off the top layer and keep going down until I'm actually cool, and I can moderate my temperature that way versus just one big item that I throw on. And if I get hot, well, I got to pull that off, now I'm cold. With this approach, you can control that temperature. And again, you want to avoid a situation where you're getting too warm. You begin to get moist underneath, which will then get wet, which then creates a whole series of problems. So think from layering perspective, and think from keeping your extremities, your hands, your head, your feet warm. Shelter and insulation. Regarding shelter and insulation, there's several options here. The first is a tent, and this is going to actually be used indoors. If there's power outage and your house only becomes cold, the goal is to retreat to one small room where you can control the temperature as much as possible. And what you're going to want to do is create a microclimate for warmth. So let's say the power goes out, we go into a warm. We'll talk about some options of keeping that room warm. But at night, if you were to put up a tent, everybody retreats into the tent, you can at least create a microclimate within that tent to keep everyone warm. Now, by the way, subscribe to our channel, and we're going to do a video next week where we'll go into a lot of implementation of everything that we're going to cover in this video, but let's go ahead and move on. The next one, and we talked about this in the previous point, but something like a Mylar blanket. These are just, simple things that you can wrap around yourself to create a heat trapping layer. These will reflect heat back on you. The next is duct tape. And if you're coming to this video, or maybe not, but again, recently hurricanes hit in the South, and obviously windows were blown out. Now imagine you're in the middle of the winter and some type of disaster came through, and you've got now windows that are knocked open, broken. You've got drafts in your house. Having some type of just basic painter's plastic sheet like this combined with duct tape, you can begin to seal off those areas where you're getting a draft. And again, it's not necessarily going to keep your area warm, but it's obviously going to keep that exchange of hot and cold air to a minimum. Now, the next item is a tarp, and this protects from wind or rain. Now, what I have here is a survival tarp. You don't have to get something like this. This just has like a foil layer on one side so it can reflect heat back. But you can pick up a tarp at, a Walmart, Home Depot for $8-10. And these are great for fixing a leaking roof or a damaged structure. How many times have you gone into a neighborhood and you've seen after a big rainstorm, people will put up tarps on their roof because maybe they had a small leak? And again, think about it from that perspective of having that ability if there's some type of damage done that you can seal that off. It can also be used as a protective ground sheet to keep you from sleeping on a wet ground or a wet floor. Speaking of sleeping on the ground, as we're talking about with a tent, if we set this up in a room, you don't want to sleep directly on the ground, even if you're in a sleeping bag. That will pull the heat away from your body. So for that reason, you're going to want some type of sleeping pad. This is one I've used for years. It just inflates up and you can pick them up, again, on Amazon or different places. And this creates a barrier between you and the ground, protecting you from losing heat to the ground. And again, we just talked about the painter's plastic a second ago for insulation or sealing off rooms. When it comes to heating, there's an element of danger whenever you introduce a heating element into your indoor environment. There's a fire hazard from a heating coil or an open flame of a candle. There's carbon monoxide hazards, even from clean burning fuels like propane or denatured alcohol stoves. Don't use any heating element unless you've inspected it for leaks, used it before, have proper ventilation, carbon monoxide and smoke detectors, which we talked about in the first point, and a fire extinguisher of some kind, which we also talked about earlier. Also, understand that even if you are using safe equipment in safe ways, again, that doesn't mean your neighbor's doing the same. The carbon monoxide and smoke detectors and fire preventatives are for your safety against their potential carelessness. So I can't stress the importance enough of having your safety measures prepped before you get into items like this. All right. That being said, there are a few options for heating, especially in an apartment or some type of small environment. Now, again, remember, as we talked about in the previous point, the goal is to retreat to one room, a small room preferably, that you can hopefully maintain your heat somewhat. You don't want to try to set something like these options up in a big open living room because you're going to be heating a large space and these simply aren't going to be able to do it. Now, the first one is a Mr. Buddy heater, and these run off propane. And again, on the side, they have a screw-in where you can put one of these small propane tanks. Now, I do have hoses here that I can use to hook into larger propane tanks. And there's videos on YouTube that show how to do that. But these are popular options for anyone with kids and maybe fall sports. But you can also use them indoors with the proper safety considerations that I already mentioned. And make sure that you have ventilation. I've camped out before in scouts. My son's in scouts, and we've been in places in cabins where we had a ventilation. The door, let's put it this way, the door didn't shut properly, and there was a big gap underneath. So it was fine. There was enough exchange of oxygen. But these also have protective measures built in. I believe that if they either tip over, they'll turn off. And if I remember correctly, these also detect carbon monoxide. Don't quote me on that. But again, have a carbon monoxide detector anytime you're using any type of open flame. Now, these propane tanks, again, right here, these are going to be used for our heating and cooking options. We'll talk about cooking a little more. At the price point and how much energy you can get out of something this small, they're just a great option. Speaking of which, if we're talking about heating, we can talk about electrical heaters, but this obviously requires a power source, and depending on the situation, if the grid has gone down and you just don't have, electricity, obviously you're not going to be able to use this. But if there are options to, hook into something with electricity, then these are a great option as well. So let's also talk very briefly about electric heaters. If you have a power source, assuming the grid didn't go down completely, or you have other options, which we'll talk about a little more in a moment, electric heaters, they can easily raise the temperature of a room a few degrees to make it a little more comfortable. The next items that are often overlooked is some type of fire starter, even just simple matches. If you have a wood stove or a fireplace, make sure you have the means to light it. And lastly, I'm going to cover a wrench. Now, why is that? Well, I would encourage you, if the grid goes down and it's freezing outside and the temperature in your house is dropping, you're going to want to turn off the water lines and you're going to try to drain the pipes in your house as much as possible, or at least open the spigots to the different sinks in your house. Why is that? Well, again, if your house, the temperature drops down and you still have pressure coming in, those lines are going to freeze up and they're going to rupture, and they'll obviously damage your house, and they can cause a significant amount of damage and cost. So again, turn off the water source at the meter and then drain out your pipes in your house by opening up something like a sink. Especially if you live in a 2-story house, ideally open up the sinks on the bottom floor to drain those out. Lighting. In an emergency, reliable lighting can make a significant difference. Battery-powered or propane lanterns are ideal for illuminating large spaces. Here in front of me, I've got a simple lantern, and this is electric. On the top, you can charge it over during the day with the solar panel on the top, and also has a place where I can plug in USB and power it. I usually in the past would bring out a propane lantern and show it as an example. I'm starting to move away from anything with any type of flame for the safety reasons we mentioned earlier in the video. And so I'm progressively moving all of my lighting over to electrical only, and especially rechargeable options, which we'll talk about a little more in a moment. Of course, as I just talked about, having a lantern, this illuminates a large area. You can pick up these options at places like Costco. These are not that expensive. And you screw off the bottom and you can replace the batteries. You've got your simple, just handheld flashlight. And I, for years, have used flashlights like this from companies, Olight. And these are rechargeable, and you can actually, again, plug in with a USB and charge these. Personally, my favorite are headlamps. Just frees up your hands. Obviously, having a lantern is very useful to illuminate a certain area, but being able to focus on something when I'm trying to work with something on my hands versus having to stick a flashlight in my mouth and trying to, see what's happening with my hands can get a little annoying. So I'm a big fan of, again, headlamps. Now, this is also USB rechargeable. It's got a port here on the side where I can plug in at the bottom to recharge this. And we'll talk a little more in a moment about recharge options. Now, lastly on this point, if you do have flashlights or lantern that require batteries, of course, have battery options. This is a Battery Daddy. I believe they sell these at Costco. I've gotten this, I want to say, on Amazon. And what we do is we just rotate the batteries throughout the year in here. So as we empty out, for example, AA will have a backup pack that we'll just swap in. And so we just keep this rotated, but we start here. Now, I also want to point out that in this video, I did not mention candles. I think I did in the past, but as we've talked about in the previous points, the potential threat of fire is just, to me, it's not worth the risk. But I do have them nonetheless. They're kind of the last backup option if I've exhausted, if we're really far into an outage where, I either run out of batteries or for whatever reason I can't recharge my flashlights. Yeah, I'm going to go to candles. But those are kind of my last line. And again, if you are comfortable using them, go for them. I'm not advocating there's some inherent danger, but I'm just trying to reduce any possibilities. We all know Murphy's Law. If it can happen, it probably will. And I just don't want to be in a situation where I'm already in one problem without electricity and in the middle of the winter, now I've got a fire to contend with. So again, if you do go with a candle, make sure, as we talked about in the first point, have the safety options of either a fire extinguisher or a fire blanket. Food and cooking. Let's go over a few of the items here that we have in front of us for cooking food, staying warm, food options, and water. And we'll talk about even taking care of the water if we run out of our primary water sources. All right, let's kind of go top down. The first one is cooking options. Now, right here, I've got a electric heating plate. This pulls 1,000 watts, and you can use this to cook on, boil water. But again, you have to have an electric source, and we'll talk about different options for power generation in just a moment. All right, the next option for, again, cooking is something like a propane camping stove. And we talked about a couple of points ago, the propane, the small little propane tanks, these screw on here, and this has 2 burners. But if you use something like this, either use it outdoors or in a well-ventilated area. Again, we're trying to reduce our exposure to carbon monoxide. Okay, so other options for heating up water very efficiently. Some of you are probably familiar with jet boils. These are very popular for camping because they just heat up the water very, very quickly. And speaking of heating up water, when we talk about food, there are options like this is freeze-dried food. Mountain House is a very popular outdoor backpacking freeze-drying food. This is freeze-dried food. All you have to do is add hot water to it, and it'll heat up the food in about 8 minutes or so. And these, if you store them properly, can last up to almost 25 years. Now, some of you maybe are familiar with MREs, meal ready to eat. These are used in the military. These are self-contained in that they have their own heating source inside to heat up water that you can slide a sleeve in to heat up, or rather a sleeve over your food items to warm that up. And so again, they're more expensive, but they're self-contained. Also, other food options. Of course, you can go to the grocery store and have your pantry stocked up with canned food. Just rotate these. But again, if you were to heat these up, maybe not creating a gourmet meal, but it's enough to keep you fed and keep you warm. Speaking of keeping warm, things like hot tea, things like hot cocoa, we want to heat up some water and we want to keep our body temperature warm. As you get colder, your body's going to have to exert energy. That's why you shake. It's trying to, again, just keep your body warm. It's exercising itself essentially, and you're burning calories in that process. So we just want to reduce our calorie dependency, because then we start burning through our food supply, and we really always want to keep our body warm. This is not the time to be picky about saying, well, this has too many calories or this and that. Yeah, keep your body warm during these times. Now, other options when we start talking about water. A lot of times people overlook this consideration, especially in the winter, because we think of summertime as needing water when it gets hot. But again, remember, even as we saw several years ago in the Snowmageddon situation in Texas, the water lines begin to freeze up, and having water stored in some type of container. When I first got serious about preparedness, I got these 7-gallon containers. I've got some 5-gallon containers here on the floor behind me. But these I fill up, I throw them in the back of the closet. As you can see, they're dark blue, so they don't grow, bacteria inside, as long as you keep them out of the light and keep them in a relatively cool place. Now, if we start going through our water reserve, how much, depending, the general rule of thumb is 1 gallon per person per day. That's bare minimum. That's just enough for really hydration and some cooking. But if we start running out of our water source and we have to go and harvest water from a stream or lake, that's really your last option. But if you do, we're going to want to have some kind of filtration system. Inside, I keep these in a little Ziploc bag, but this is a mini Sawyer, and these are designed to process up to 100,000 gallons of water, believe it or not. Obviously, you're going to want to pre-filter that water, but these little filter systems can make it drinkable. And on top of that, if you do pull from a wild water source, you're going to want to have purification tablets. While these are designed to, remove bacteria, if for whatever reason there's a viral situation, we want to make sure we have these. I've caught Giardia before, and you don't want that. This is a water straw, or called life straw. You'll see these all the time. They're great if you're actually pulling water, sucking water out of something, a water source. But again, you're not going to be able to process water through it to put it in a container like this. You can only pull out water as you're drinking it from the straw. So overall, again, just think about from the perspective, if you look at this, it's kind of like, hey, we're going camping. It's not too far off. Again, you're almost camping in your house. So you want to reduce the need to do a lot of cooking and cleaning. That's why I like having freeze-dried food, because I can just put the hot water in there, use it, and toss a bag out. MREs are not too different from it. Canned food, very similar. But we talked about a electric hot plate, and we'll get into just a second. We'll talk about different power options. Communication and power. You have to stay connected to the outside world, even when the roads are out and the bridges are down. To do this, you need communication equipment and power sources. Now, after these hurricanes that we've seen over the last several weeks, I've had people reach out to me and let me know that even these small $10 hand crank radios have been a big game changer, because they can, get different signals. Some of these have the NOAA weather on them, so you can get up to date with real-time emergency information. There's a lot of different brands. Red Cross has their own, and again, as I pointed out, these are hand cranked, and so you can actually keep the power up. And on that note, with these types of hand crank radios, again, there's so many different ones on the market. What you'll notice is on many of them, they have these plugins here on the back, and you can actually plug in a USB cord, and you can plug in your different devices like your cell phone or other USB power devices. So make sure that you have the right cords, and always keep these with them. And again, the point is, on this note, communication. You can, again, crank these. They have a flashlight. We talked about flashlights earlier, but having this option is, at a minimum, a power production option, a bare minimum option, but it's a starting point. Now, again, when we get into communication, having a two-way radio, these are ham radios. Many of you are probably familiar with Baofeng. These are pretty entry level, about $25. They work, they're not great. You have the more advanced ones, or rather the more expensive ones that are higher quality. But with a ham radio, you do need a license to communicate during normal times, but during emergencies, you are allowed to broadcast on these. Speaking of power production, one other option is something like a small solar panel. This is a 28-watt solar panel, and you can plug in your USB right here, and you can fold this all the way out. Now, these aren't going to power a lot, but again, they can power your essentials, in this case, your phone, or some very basic small items. Now, when we also, as we talked about a second ago, having battery backup options and something like a battery daddy where you keep these rotating, keep them fresh, that's just something that we have here in our home. And on this channel, I focus, and rather I do a lot of videos where I compare these, what are called solar generators. You can plug these into solar panels. This is a company called Jackery. They're pretty popular. You can power some pretty, advanced stuff like appliances, I mean, you're not going to power big items. I did do a video a couple of weeks ago showing the options for whole home solar generators that can actually output 240, and they can power a substantial amount of your house. But those have a hefty price tag. These are some of these, I know they have had crazy deals here lately, but in the next few weeks for Black Friday, they'll probably run 50% off on these again. So a lot of the manufacturers will usually cut them really deep on those holidays. So again, I'll post a link to a video down below for our solar generator comparison video if you're interested in picking up something like that. So when we look at these different options, remember, we're trying to think about providing some power for probably the basics, in this case, something like communication. But as we've talked about in the previous points, if you want a heating plate to cook some food, or even running a space heater, this could run a space heater for maybe an hour. If you have solar panels, you can extend that period of time. But these do come in handy in a disaster situation. Having these essential winter items in your prepping supplies can really make all the difference when disaster strikes. And while we hope for the best here at this channel, it's crucial to prepare for the worst, especially during the harsh winter months when being stuck indoors for extended periods of time is a very real possibility. Each of the items that we covered, whether for safety, for warmth, for shelter, for heating, lighting, food, or communication, they can provide you and your family with the resources needed to stay comfortable and, more importantly, safe. I would encourage you to start gathering these supplies now, so when the next winter storm or the next power outage hits, you're ready to face it head on. To explore topics like the one we covered in this video, I would encourage you to check out the two videos here on the side of the screen and in the comments and description section below. The first video is our prediction for this coming winter, and the second is 9 easy hacks to save energy this winter and also stay warm. Also in the comment sections, I'm going to drop a link to our Surviving Extreme Weather Free Guide, which will equip you with everything you need to know to make certain that even the most brutal of winters are inconveniences for you and not disasters. As always, stay safe out there.